Welcome. So let's talk about hormones. So hormones are one of the biggest triggers for migraines. If you get a migraine just before your period or around ovulation, then you know what I'm talking about. There's a few things that we're going to talk about why these things might be happening. But what happens if you get a migraine after your period starts or at the tail end of your period? So there's actually a really simple solution that you probably have in your cupboard right now that can actually make a world of difference in these situations that you've probably never even heard about. So I'm going to share that with you in just a minute. So my name is Dr. Tanya Paynter, and I've been treating chronic migraine patients for almost a decade now. So if you want to know more about my story and who I am, you can check out my description or my bio in the description below. All right, so let's get into it. One of the most common things that I hear most women have noticed that triggers their migraines is their period. And even if you don't have a hormone relating migraine, or if you haven't noticed that hormones trigger your period, you know how much hormones affect us, right? Like they just mess with us. So here's the weird thing though. It can be a hormone issue, but it might not be something that happens every month. And so it can be it can be really confusing to figure out if hormones are playing a big role, a minor role, or just kind of an underlying issue. But I will let you in on a little secret. I will guarantee that if you are a woman and you have migraines, your hormones are playing a role to some extent. Okay, 100%. So it's always something to be aware of. And there are things that we can do to kind of help optimize things. So the problem is that you might not be able to see the patterns that are typical with a hormonal thing. So again, I have talked before about how migraines are almost like a perfect storm, right? You have to have all the right ingredients in order to trigger a migraine. So for you, that might look like it's a high pollen day and you're under a lot of stress and you didn't get a lot of sleep last night and you ate something that a lot of sugar and is also a certain time in your cycle, right? And all of those things together come together to make a migraine happen for you. Whereas if you were in a different point of your cycle, you might have been able to tolerate everything up and the hormones just pushed you over the edge, right? And so we can see a lot of these confusing, confounding factors to a migraine, because if we don't know what all is going on with them, what's triggering them, what's causing them, then it can be really confusing to just figure out. And then I hear all the time, like, I don't know what's happening. It seems completely random. So what we want to do is kind of take a look at and track our migraines with our cycle every month religiously. Like if you track your period, you're tracking your migraines, and we're seeing if there are clusters around certain points in our period. And here's the thing with women and in our cycles, we have a lot of fluctuations throughout the month. About every week, we're having some sort of a major hormonal shift. Now, throw on top of, well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me back up. So let's talk about some of the common patterns that we can see and what we might be able to do about them, okay? So I'm gonna have 4 different tips on how you can help to regulate and monitor and regulate a hormonal migraine. All right, so first of all, our progesterone. So progesterone is our calming hormone. It's very anti-inflammatory. It's actually considered a neurosteroid, which means a brain steroid or a brain anti-inflammatory. And so one of the things that happens when we're under chronic stress is that the things that go to make progesterone in our body actually go to make different hormones, our stress hormones. And so the very first thing that is sacrificed, is our progesterone, which means that we end up with a lot of PMS symptoms, a lot of bloating, mood swings, irritability, insomnia, anxiety, all of these things that happen right before our period starts. And it's a very, very common time for migraines to be triggered, because when that ratio of estrogen to progesterone is off during that period and we have that hormone switch and we're not getting the boost of progesterone that we're supposed to, then we end up in a very miserable week, right, leading up to our period. And then sometimes, if it's strictly progesterone, then sometimes after your period starts and it's like sweet relief, right? But when we're deficient in progesterone, that can be a major trigger. So I always look for that pattern of, is it in the week before my period that starts, or, a client's period before they start? Then that would usually, not always, but usually indicate that there's a progesterone deficiency. All right, number 2, estrogen drops. When we have normal levels of estrogen and then we have a sudden shift and it drops, those estrogen drops in our body will actually trigger migraines. There's tons of research that's showing that this is the case. Estrogen itself is very pro-inflammatory. So again, if our ratio between estrogen and progesterone off and what is off, then what we end up seeing is that our estrogen becomes more pro-inflammatory. We don't have the anti-inflammatory actions of the progesterone. So again, that's where that imbalance can take place. But when we're looking at estrogen, and it's also necessary for us to feel good, right? So our estrogen dominant part of our cycle is in the first half of our cycle from the time that our period starts. Usually we're looking about halfway through that our period, our estrogen starts to climb again up until ovulation, and then it starts to drop, and then it starts to climb a little bit in the second half of our cycle. And so when I hear that there's a migraine and it's worse like during your period and or the week before ovulation, usually that's an estrogen deficiency issue, or you've had, your estrogen is up and then it has dropped too much. So that in those cases, we want to do some things to help support our estrogen production. I tend to see that less often, to be honest with you. Most of the time it's more of the progesterone stuff, but I definitely have seen quite a few cases where they feel, my clients have felt worse in the week after their period. And that's usually, it's not across the board, usually related to estrogen drops. All right, so now I want to get into what happens when I notice that it seems like every 8 weeks or so I get a hormone related migraine, but it doesn't happen every month. So these are really tricky. And there's what I like to call the jerk ovary. So all of us have it. There's always one ovary. So let me back up. We have 2 ovaries. Each ovary is essentially responsible for a month, right? So right ovary takes over this month, left ovary is next month, right ovary this month, next. That's assuming you have both ovaries, they are both functioning properly. What ends up happening, and of course there are times when an ovary will take like a double turn, so then it will kind of throw that 2-month pattern off, and it'll be kind of a back-to-back kind of thing, and then it starts over again. So there are always those little wonky things that happen, so just being aware of that. But usually we're looking for that every other month pattern as well. So we have a week to week pattern, we have an ovulation to period pattern, we have a monthly pattern, and we have an every 2-month pattern. And so these are a lot of patterns to look for, right? But if you're tracking your migraines and you're tracking it with your cycle, you can actually start to pick out, oh, look, it does seem like every even month I have a pretty good cluster of migraines right before my period starts. So that would indicate that the ovary responsible for that month's hormones is not functioning the way that it should. And so that there's not really much to do about it past, working on balancing hormones and doing some things to help support proper hormone production. But it is very, very helpful to be aware of that so that okay, yes, I'm going to have maybe a rougher month this month. It's not unexpected. How can I really make sure I'm taking care of myself, knowing that, this is going to be my bad hormone month, right? So, and then of course, that's as you work on healing those underlying issues so that you no longer have to be that aware of how things are going. But there's a very big satisfaction, or I don't know if satisfaction is the right word, something soothing, something that basically doesn't make you feel like this is happening to you when you understand what is happening, right? There's a power in understanding where some of these things are coming from. And so that's one of the reasons that I like to have my clients track things, is so that they understand what might be triggering stuff. And it's not so confusing and scary, because it's not like this is just randomly happening out of the blue. Oh, I understand. This is my bad hormone month. I really need to make sure that I'm doing extra things to care for myself during this month, if that makes sense. So, that's something to kind of pay attention to. All right, let's talk about the fourth thing. So this is the one that I alluded to at the very beginning, that you probably have this in your cupboard. So when we have our periods, when you have a migraine starting in the middle towards the end, or maybe it's triggered at the end of your period, In a lot of cases, it's relating to iron deficiency. We've just bled a lot. If your iron stores are pretty low to begin with, and then you go through a week of bleeding, that can deplete our iron stores to the point where iron deficiency will trigger migraines. So that can be an easy thing to try, is to add in. Now, this is assuming that you don't have elevated iron levels. So do not try this if you've had blood tests and you see that you have elevated iron levels, or your doctor has said your iron levels are high. Okay, don't do this. But if you're not sure, you don't have any family history of hemochromatosis or any other iron holding on, that your body doesn't hold on to iron, then you can always give it a try and see if it makes any effects, on you. As far as your migraines post period. So you don't need to take it through the entire month, unless you are deficient, in which case you should be talking to your doctor about that. But you can start doing some iron supplementation, maybe the week before your period and the week of your period, which can help to just give you enough extra stores so that that iron deficiency isn't something that is contributing to that post period migraine. So that's a little trick that you can give a try, and just be aware, iron can cause nausea. A lot of times you want to take it with food for that reason. So, and of course, before you start anything, just check with your doctor and make sure it's okay, because if you, like I said, if you do have an issue with iron, that's probably not a great idea for you to do. All right. So I'm not going to go too much into the things that we can do to balance hormones at this point. That's going to be a future video. But I wanted to make you guys aware of how hormones are playing a big role in our migraines, and also, learning how to kind of track it to see, all right, are you noticing it? Even though you might have migraines through the entire month, you might notice that the migraines around period or hormone shift times are more intense. They last longer. They're less responsive to medication, because the triptans, your abortives, all of those things are usually less effective for hormonal migraines. So if you run into, well, sometimes my triptans are amazing and sometimes they don't seem to work at all, this can be why, because it's not a triptan responsive type of migraine. It's a hormone migraine, which, until we do stuff with the hormones, is not really going to be affected by anything. So anyway, there you go. That's my little spiel on hormones. So if you found this video helpful, and I'd love to have you guys share it for me to get kind of the word out for others to understand some more about what's going on with their hormones and migraines. And then like my channel, so you know when new content is coming out. All right, until next time.